back to another episode of Caffeinated CX, where we talk about CX and stuff all in a hyper-caffeinated state. I'm David, and with me today is Jess Yergin from the Misery Machine podcast.
Hi.
Hey, Jess, do you want to introduce yourself? Give us a little bit about your background.
Absolutely. So I'm Jess Yergin, as David stated, and I go by Yergy on my podcast. And my background is customer service. I worked at a call center that handled a plethora of different clients for many years, basically 8 years out of my 20s. I did a little bit of retail, and currently I work for a bank that is big on the East Coast in Canada. And I host a true crime podcast with my partner called The Misery Machine.
All right. So, and it's not only the fact that we've known each other for like 20 years.
Yeah.
But also because of your experience at that call center, I reached out to you. Very tragic, and a lot of what I talked about is how leadership has failed and or triumphed during COVID, but which brings its own set of tragedies and everything else. But also, most leadership has failed during this time. Either they couldn't pivot hard enough, or they couldn't lead because they've never played World of Warcraft, they've never experienced guild chat, right? So
right.
That's all Slack and Discord is. It's just guild chat. So
yeah.
Ridiculous. And no, not many people could pivot that way and lead. And our culture is dead. So just because you can't type, it's fine.
Right.
But anyway, you actually experienced in a leadership role as a team lead supervisor, actual real tragedy.
Yes, I did.
Do you want to dive into that?
I can. So I became a manager at the contact center in 2007. I had never had a leadership role at a call center before. I had some management experience in retail. And I mean, in becoming a new manager, it has its own, learning curve that goes along with it, having to manage people, sometimes with difficult personalities. And in fall of 2007, we had an agent go missing. And there was like a lot of questions about it. She had a spouse that was in another country. Folks didn't know whether she just had enough of Lewiston, Maine, and decided to go to Greece or Syria. I forget which exactly where he lived. I think he was a Syrian living in Greece. And then there was like all this chatter on the call floor about what might have happened, what the police were looking into. The police then came into the contact center to talk to people. And very quickly, it was discovered that another agent had murdered her, had lured her with the promise of selling her a car for $500, and then strangled and assaulted her and buried her in a shallow grave behind a shopping center. She was also 8 months pregnant at the time. So that was the very first tragedy we dealt with.
Yeah.
The second tragedy occurred in 2011. We had a young woman working for us, and there was a brother and sister who were twins that were working on separate campaigns at the time. And unbeknownst to a lot of folks that went on, I found out about this a little bit later on. The sister was running a prostitution ring with a supervisor on her campaign that was also her boyfriend. Through this, a young girl who was working at the contact center, who then was also escorting for her, was murdered as well. And come to find out, the person that allegedly murdered her was my team lead, who I was training to be a supervisor.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah.
So, wow. And when the first girl went missing, tragically, well, you know what the turnover rate and the no call no show rate is at a call center. So maybe for the first couple of days, nobody really thought anything.
Nope.
So, because what was the turnover rate there, if you remember?
Turnover rates, oh goodness. That I don't remember my exact attrition numbers. It's been so long, but it was pretty high. Out of a training class, you'd maybe retain, and the training classes were usually like 20 people, 4 or 5 would stay long term.
Yeah.
But they'd usually turn over in a year or so. But the idea that she might have just had enough, no call, no showed, went on maternity leave early, it wasn't out of the question. So a lot of folks weren't particularly worried early on.
Right. So yeah, and industry-wide, the turnover rate at a call center is like 40 to 50%.
Yeah.
right? You'd be in that 20-person training class, and then 6 weeks later, you're looking around and I don't know any of these people.
Right. And a
Like,
lot of them didn't even make it out of training.
right, right. No, and other people just went for the training and get the extra $300
Yes.
and then moved on their way to the next one in town. But when it came out that she was actually missing, how did that affect the floor?
It was very strange because they pulled all of the managers into a meeting to let us know what actually had happened, because things started to happen pretty fast once they realized she wasn't missing. Within about a month or so, they already had him apprehended. He was in jail.
Mhm.
And there was a little bit of chit chat on the floor. There was like, this time around, there was like a lot of camaraderie. For example, when he was convicted, there was a manager on the floor who did everything in her power to protect him, including shredding his early release form. Yeah. And I mean, it was absolutely insane, but management gave us some resources. They finally hired security.
Mm.
In a lot of office buildings, they have at least like Securitas there.
Right.
You know, as sure as you remember, over at this contact, there was no security there
No,
whatsoever,
no.
except for like when it was in the Bates Mill, they had like the Bates Mill, like general security. So
Yeah,
they
they had
finally
us
gave
back
us security
downstairs now.
cards. Yeah. They gave us security cards at one door. And they had they didn't have a grief counselor. They had Lewiston police come in to talk about how to protect yourself. And that really was the extent of it. And, you know, folks were sad for a little while, but eventually they forgot that it happened, which was really strange and like macabre if you think about it, but
Yeah,
it just kind of went away.
that's sad.
It is really sad.
So, and then, wow, I can't even imagine that. So it's like person murdered, murderer worked there. It's okay. So
Yeah.
that's weird.
I mean, there
Now,
were more bizarre things that went along with it. For example, her daughter started working for the company,
oh, that's
and
bizarre.
it
Yeah.
was really, really bizarre. And then eventually they had to let her go because she sued the company, basically because it came out that the person that murdered her mother had done hard time before, had all sorts of offenses, including like assaulting women. There was one instance where he was making suggestive comments to an employee at work, and it seemed to have just kind of like gone under the rug. Like upper management really didn't do anything about it, and it didn't go anywhere else. And the biggest one was he was working for a financial campaign.
Yeah.
And at the time, they were trying to get a class in, so they ignored or didn't really do the background checks. And he had a crime of honesty. So, like, he had robbed a bank before. So, with all that in mind, I believe she got like a 5 or 6 figure settlement out of the deal.
Good. Good.
Yeah.
It should have been more.
Yes.
So the absence of a background check, and for a lot of financial campaigns, didn't you have to go for a credit check as well?
So credit checks they never did. So they did a background check. I personally was never background checked. I don't know why that was, but they never did it to me. But moving forward from that, they made sure they had that in place. That was like one step that they definitely did. Everyone from that point on was background checked.
Right. Seems like it would have been a client requirement, but
Right.
maybe not. So
Yeah, not on all of them. It should be.
yeah, that's ridiculous. So now when the second one happened, especially when it came out that the person, the culprit, was on your team and being groomed to be a team lead supervisor, how did you take that? And then second, how did the team take that?
So it was very mixed. This one was, and I have like a lot of regrets about it. I really do, because I, for the longest time, did not believe that that he did it. I did things that possibly could have kept my job in jeopardy, like providing information to his lawyer, because I didn't think he did it. And I was trying to convince people that he didn't do it. And a lot of the agents felt that way. There were other folks on different campaigns or on surrounding teams that really just wanted to take up a pitchfork and go after him, because she was a really well-liked agent on another campaign, had a lot of friends on the floor.
Mhm.
And like, I was just like at a loss. This was somebody that I trusted, someone I considered a friend.
Right.
And I couldn't separate the two. In
Mhm.
hindsight, I definitely do regret that a lot, because that's not the type of, energy that you want to have on the floor when you're responsible for like 30, 40 people.
Right.
But that's like how I handled it at the time. The agents, it was really, really mixed. We did at this point have a grief counselor come in, HR came in, police came back in.
Mhm.
And on the higher level, they were all about what this was going to look like to the clients, because not only had it happened once, it happened again. And from what Vin told me, the choice to rebrand yet another time was based on that, because they wanted to distance the name away
Right.
from what it was and from the two crimes.
Yeah. So first it was when I was there, when it was at the Bates Mill, it was one
Yeah.
name and then turned into another one. And then when you guys moved over into the old, what was it, in Ames?
It was an Ames building.
Yeah, at the mall that they had
Mm-hmm.
with the bull moose. That's the only thing I remember that was in that mall. Right. I don't.
It's there's not much there anymore. The bull moose is still there, but
Oh,
yeah.
good. Good. Wasn't as good as the one in Brunswick, but whatever.
Right.
So then, so the upper management at the center was more worried about how the clients would take it. Okay.
Right.
So tell me more about that. How did the clients take it?
From what I could tell, nobody really cared that much. I just think
Oh,
that they were really worried about the negative publicity that the site would have based on not one but two murders happening. I
right.
had a pretty close relationship with our clients. The ops manager that we had at the time, she was too busy chasing her boss's job. So I mostly
Oh,
did like the job of the operations manager, and I had to talk with the clients every single day, several times a day.
yeah.
And they either didn't tell them or they didn't really seem to have that much of a problem with it.
Oh, oh, great. Now for the agents that were on the floor, and it was a pretty big center. Um,
Yes.
like when I left that place, it was like 300 or so agents.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it had doubled or something by this time.
Right. There were
Um,
5 to 6 campaigns there at that
yeah,
point, full.
yeah. I was there when it was like Synapse, and which I
Mm-hmm.
don't think exists anymore, so I can say
No.
it. So,
Yes.
um, but yeah, did they offer any like time off or bereavement or no?
Nope. I don't think they did. At least they weren't very good about bereavement, period. I mean, when I
Oh,
had a relative die, they wanted me to fly out to Ohio and fly back the next day. It wouldn't even give me the normal bereavement you get at a workplace.
yeah,
And yeah, they didn't offer anything like that for the agents who wanted to do anything regarding it. Or, I mean, the grief counselor they had wasn't even really a grief counselor. It was somebody from like the company.
so HR, yeah,
Yeah,
so
it was like HR related.
yeah, so nobody would say anything bad about the company to,
Right.
yeah, nice, nice,
And there was like a big thing about speaking with the media in any capacity. We would be fired immediately.
fired immediately.
Yeah.
So how was communication there? Because when I was there was no like employee email or anything like that.
No, they still didn't have email at the time because the clients didn't want that for security reasons. Basically, you had to take your team, maybe 5 at a time, into a tiny little office to talk to them. And that was the extent of it.
Oh yeah, because you can't have too many people off the floor.
Right.
Yeah, like
Yep.
yeah, hey, the person you sat next to is dead. We're gonna take you two, and the rest of you, well, there's 100 calls in queue.
Right. That's
That kind of
basically
thing.
exactly what happens.
Yeah, I couldn't even imagine being an agent on that team,
Mhm.
on either of the teams, or even on the floor during that time.
Right. Because it was
So
just like, at the new site, there were no walls. So it was
no,
just like one big floor.
right. And then yeah, I remember seeing it. They had the pods and everything else,
Mhm.
which not my preferred style of call center floor. But
No, it was chaotic. You
yeah,
couldn't even see where a campaign ended or began. So
yeah. So as let's see. So second murder with the prostitution ring, which is huge. I mean, that just goes to goes into like call center employee pay and call center employee resources, everything like that.
Yeah, I mean, if
Oh,
that's like the thing we were talking about in the special with Vin,
mhm,
had we been paying people a living wage, she might not have had to do something like that. Not
yeah,
that I really like, I'm faulting her, like,
mhm,
I don't judge, but maybe she wouldn't have had to put herself in a position where like dangerous things could happen. Because
right.
it wasn't even the fact that they weren't paying very well. I mean, they weren't paying the managers very well, period. But at the time, they went and switched to an activity based compensation that could put
Mhm,
you at minimum wage. And there were folks that had worked there for 10 plus years or more who were lifers who went from, making what would have been a lot of money back then to
mhm,
making like $7 an hour.
mhm. Okay, so basically minimum wage, then you get a certain bonus for each one of your KPIs that you're hitting.
Basically.
So yeah, I ran one where like attendance was there and your NPS and your upsells and stuff where you
Right.
didn't get a commission off the upsells, but you'd get, if you met the number, you'd get an extra dollar an hour or something.
Hmm.
Right.
The thing about theirs was they didn't take into account that the fact that our call volume wasn't consistent all the time.
Mhm.
And some of the campaigns, they would have runs on different cards if it was like a financial based campaign. So you could make a lot of money on like one split, and on the next split, you wouldn't be making anything and you'd be sitting there making minimum wage. And, on the campaign that I worked for, your big metrics were your quality, your AHT, and they had a save rate because it was a retention sales campaign.
Right.
Well, I don't really want to trash the client, but like it was hard to meet all of them. It was almost
Right.
impossible to meet all of them because they had a very, very low AHT goal. And if you were doing,
Yeah.
if you were within it, you either weren't trying to save somebody or your quality was trash. So there was nobody that could hit all of them. So you
No,
were never actually making all the money that you could.
no, retention calls require time. And
Yeah.
if depending on the weight of the KPIs, AHT is a horrible, horrible metric to incentivize on because
Yeah.
you're going to rush people off the phone.
Yeah.
So that's terrible, especially like these people that have been there 10 years. Like I'm gonna imagine because it's Maine, they're making $12, $13 an hour,
Yeah.
right? If not more, maybe more.
Yeah. I mean, I think the
Oh,
most we had someone in the mid 15 range who had been there, and that was just, getting an annual raise,
yeah.
based on what minimum wage was when they started.
Basically, their pay was cut in half.
Yes.
So that's amazing. I'd stay. No.
Yeah. I would either. I mean, but that's the thing as well, because like I have to think about this as like a manager too. I mean, they salaried me. What my salary came out to based on the work that I did wasn't very much.
Right.
And it got to the point where they were keeping you there in poverty because you couldn't afford to get a better job.
Right. And at that
Like,
time, there
yeah,
were no other jobs. Like
yeah. I mean,
that
where
call
I
center was
ended
the
up,
main employer.
yeah, where I ended up was basically where folks graduated to once they were done with that contact center. But at the
Mhm.
time, they had an extremely strict dress code. And I just couldn't afford to buy clothes to work there. It
Right.
took me getting laid off and getting paid out all of the PTO that they wouldn't let me take, plus the severance to be able to work there.
Yeah. I know the center you're talking about. I worked there for
Yes.
that's about right before I moved out of the state.
Yeah.
So, which it did pay a lot better.
Hmm.
But yeah, you did have to dress up. And
Yeah.
I had to go to the thrift stores around town and get like collared shirts and stuff because I had none.
Oh yeah. I
So,
like what just went into Walmart and like got what I could to get by until I started getting checks there.
so, and that's sad because a lot of times, like call center, the people that work there are well underpaid, undertrained, and the last thing is they're really underappreciated by both senior management
Yes.
and usually the clients, especially in bigger centers like that where they manage pretty much off of a spreadsheet, right?
Yes.
It's different at a team lead or supervisor level because you actually get to know the people, right? Um, and you actually get to sit down with them. I'm sure there was coaching and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, the campaign I was on had like probably the most strict coaching policies. I
Mm,
had to like monitor 3 calls per week on every single agent in my team. I had a
mhm.
minimum of like 30 people.
Ouch.
Show like how many hours I was putting in because I had a huge team. Then we had to listen to every call together after I did it, and then
Yeah.
like go was putting insane hours. Like I
Mhm.
never went home.
That's sad. Um, yeah, so that kind of treatment, micromanaged coaching is just weird to me.
Yeah.
So, because you can't really build up rapport with your agents if you're just, you know, going over stats when that's your only meeting with them and everything like that, especially when you have no time to do
Right.
anything else. So you don't have time for the regular one-on-ones. So you can't even take a temperature check at that point.
Right.
So
By the time you like got a temperature check, it was them storming off,
yeah.
unfortunately, or something happening where you had to let somebody go,
Right.
or a
So
homicide happening.
or a homicide happening.
Yeah.
So what was the culture like before the first incident at the center?
You know, it's really, really interesting because we were in a period of time where things were actually looking good. We had gotten a new manager in, or site manager,
Mhm.
and a lot of people didn't like him at first because they thought that he was getting rid of a lot of people, and they weren't really the greatest people. He was getting,
Right.
they weren't great, so they were leaving. And he got us into the new site, got us some new clients in, and things looked happy. People were actually happy to be to work. At that point, like I wasn't a manager yet, but I
Mm-hmm.
was on a campaign that I probably would have stayed an agent on had we kept it.
Yeah.
And like folks like actually like to be there. Vin actually described him as being like the Michael Scott of like site managers, but I still really liked him.
Mm-hmm.
And then after he left, and the first murder happened, things just went downhill from there. They started just like scrapping the place apart. Anybody who was in any sort of like administrative position that wasn't, that didn't churn money out, they were gone.
Wow.
So yeah, like not HR. Yeah, we had an on-site HR guy. He was gone. We didn't have a receptionist anymore. We didn't have a payroll person that went to the direct like people managers directly. They got rid of workforce. We became workforce management on top of that. We were often doing interviews for campaigns that weren't even ours. Like I probably like hired thousands of people because like they just didn't really have that many people in recruiting anymore. Like anybody, we stopped having like a site manager. Just whoever was the most senior ops manager or SBU manager at the time took over that role. It was just insane. So it went from a very brief period where it was really happy and fun to be there
Mm-hmm.
to first murder happening, site manager Michael Scott leaving, and then it went downhill.
So they got rid of anybody that wasn't generating
The
money.
revenue. Yeah.
So yeah, which well, that's dumb. So
Yeah.
it's like so pure profit, and that came from corporate, right?
Yes,
The
it did.
okay, it didn't come from the clients or anything.
No, I'm sure the clients would have
Clients would
probably
have
been
probably
like
been
really upset.
yeah, they probably would have been pissed.
Yeah.
So they kind of need you to do your job instead of HRs or payrolls. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's ridiculous. So how did that affect the floor when that happened, when they saw all the admin and HR and everything else just getting jettisoned?
Like quite honestly, I don't think they like noticed. Like I think there was
Hmm.
just a culture at that point where, you'd see someone one day, they'd be gone the
Mhm.
next, that they
Yeah.
didn't, and it didn't affect them really. Like at the very like base agent level, this didn't affect them whatsoever. They still would just like come in, do their job, take breaks, go home. It
Yeah.
mostly like affected like the frontline management because
Mm.
on top of like duties we were doing like above and beyond for our own campaigns, all of these other admin duties were now ours.
That must have affected your teams too. I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah, that makes it so much more difficult to manage a
Hmm.
team, even if you only have
Right.
like 10, 20 people on it. I mean,
Yeah.
you said you had like 30. So
Right. Because like the team that I was on, it was a part of a bigger campaign, but they couldn't keep managers because it was just so horrible.
Right.
And we went from 4 down to, when I like was laid off because we lost the campaign, it was just me with all the agents. And yeah, doing
That's
all their payroll and all their monitoring.
no. So it's been said that a human being, no matter how great their leadership skill is, should only be like 10 should be the max, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's like too much still. So like that's why in like the SEALs and everything, they have 5 to 6 person fire teams per squad leader or whatever. I don't know, but it's 5 to 6 people per team lead, right? Which makes it so that you can actually monitor and get to know them. And if something goes wrong, you can course correct. When it gets beyond that, it becomes impossible to do any course corrections because once you discover an issue, it's like a few days after the issue happened when you're monitoring the call. And then if you're only monitoring 3 of the calls, I mean, on average, how many calls would they take a day?
Oh, tons of them. And that was the great part about it too, because it wasn't just like I was their QA too, because they got rid of QA. So those 3 calls, yeah. So those 3 calls that I was doing per week was all they were getting, aside from like the QA that the client was doing like on their own.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't have a QA person. They like got rid of those early on as well.
Now, did they get rid of these people because they like a client pulled out and they lost money, or is it directly because of the murder that happened, or
no, just because they weren't generating revenue? They considered that like as the same as an admin position, because they could like put that on the direct managers to do.
A little bit in shock here. QA
Yeah.
is one of the most important jobs at a call center, especially upsize. So
yep.
That's ridiculous.
Yep.
So did the culture ever recover before the second one?
So no, not really. I mean, not really. What they had built in that very short period of, I'd say like 6 months, was gone. There was nothing. They got a couple of new site managers. They'd always end up leaving or moving into another position, and never really fully recovered. We lost clients during that time period as well. They weren't really sure what was going to be the future of the site, and then they ended up getting some in. We had a roadside assistance campaign that came in, and then the one that I worked for, because initially I was a manager for a financial sales campaign, and then moved over to the retention sales.
Right.
And from there, it seemed like it was going to be okay. Like things were starting to rebound, but then they did a lot of things from the top that didn't really make any sense. For example, they stopped hiring from within for upper management positions. So, I mean, at this point, I had been, a manager on the floor, supervisor for years, and they were grooming me for an official ops manager position, and it was literally pulled out from under me completely.
They stopped promoting entirely from within.
Right.
Yeah,
I'd been moved over to a new campaign to take the role, and a lot of people had said that I had already got it. Vin was going to congratulate me, and they went with a woman who was from, she was retired. She worked for MBNA when that was still kind of a bank, and they hired her, and she had over an hour and a half commute and did it because she was bored. So she became our ops manager because she was bored, and from there they started hiring all of her cronies as SBU and ops managers in the building.
I've seen that happen before, yeah. It's never good when that happens because, everything falls apart. So did that include like regular agents being able to move up to team lead supervisor?
To some extent, yeah. So we had a few that ended up getting promoted, but they started like really heavily pulling from outside. I know one got hired on my campaign simply because she was related to one of the other ops managers.
Oh.
And there started to be all sorts of weird like nepotism like that. And it was not a good culture whatsoever. because nobody could really aspire to be anything. What they were doing at that point is if folks were getting antsy, they wanted to move up, they'd make up positions to put them in to like quiet them down. So Buddy, who was the guy who allegedly murdered the young woman
Mhm.
who was murdered, he was basically, we called him my team lead. Other, people call him a SME or whatever, but there was a good chance he was never going to actually end up in a role, no matter how much I taught him.
Right. So for the average agent, I mean, what would be the point of excelling other than the incentive-based pay, obviously?
Right.
But
There wouldn't be.
was there a cap on the pay?
Yeah, there was a cap on that, and a lot of them didn't hit it. I mean, in some cases, like Drew, my co-host,
Mm-hmm.
he was an acting manager and never really wanted to go into like a role because they
Right.
had a way of paying him for what he was doing because they actually lacked supervisors on that campaign. So he was an active role and refused an official position because he didn't want to be at a capped salary like I was.
Right.
Because they had put me in a pay freeze as well. So I was no longer getting any bonuses or raises annually.
How long were you frozen?
Up until like I was laid off. So it was like
I mean,
5 years I was frozen.
Yeah, and keeping people in poverty so they can't move out of the town or the job, there's not many other choices. And at that time, what people do now with side hustles and gig economy and everything just didn't exist.
No.
For the most part, other than what these people were doing. So it's disgusting, honestly.
It really is. It was.
So
I don't regret being there because I've made a whole lot of connections that were just like wonderful. That's where I met you.
Yeah.
But like, it really put me behind in my 20s because I was stuck there for 8 years.
Yeah. Oh, we go way beyond that.
Yeah. I mean, officially.
Officially.
At work.
Yeah. Just, hey, I know that person.
Yes.
So, been like a couple year gap in between when we both got out of the scene. So that's okay. It's okay to talk about it.
Yes.
Back with the mohawk.
Yes, with the
mohawk. So pay freeze for 5 years, no upward mobility. So, and then stuck.
Yeah.
So, and if that was the entire culture on the floor, honestly, when people got laid off, that must have been like sort of a relief.
Like in a way it was like, it was a relief because I was finally free of it. I got basically a month off before I started my other training class. But like there was a big part of me that was really stubborn that I couldn't stay to see the whole thing through. At that point I was like feeling vengeful about like my management. I just wanted to show them, but
yeah, I think that's natural.
Yeah.
So now the second murder happened, like, did the floor take it the same way as the first one? Or it was probably an entirely different
Not at all.
For the most part.
It was entirely different crew. So you had the crew that, were up in arms, wanted to get pitchforks and torches and wanted to kill Buddy. So you had that group. You had the ones that were sad. You had the ones that were supporting me, but were secretly really sad. And you had the folks that were just like making jokes about the whole thing because that was their only way to deal with it.
Yeah, defense mechanism.
Yeah,
I get that. So
because it was just like this whole big thing about, we're obviously not safe here at work and management really doesn't care because this happened again. So, laughing on your way to the electric chair type of thing.
Yeah, like, fuck it, let's see if we get killed today. So that kind
Right.
of, yeah, I could definitely see people acting like that. So, and then did it die out like the first time when people just stopped caring, or?
Eventually it was forgotten, but it took a lot longer. Folks definitely had a different opinion of me because there was all these like rumors circulating, as to why I was upset. But it's hard to say, like, because I left in 2012. That's when like my campaign died.
Yeah.
This occurred summer of 2011. So it was a very short period. Eventually people did stop talking about it. They actually didn't want us talking about it on the floor. Eventually they were, threatening write-ups and terminations for even talking about it.
That's first of all, that's impossible to stop.
Yeah.
Because it directly affected these people. I mean, how could you not talk about it?
Yeah. I still did. We just talked about it in secret.
No.
But I mean, at that point, when I got done, my campaign went away.
Mm-hmm.
They went and sent my agents to other campaigns.
Right.
The campaigns they went on eventually went away. And it got to the point where about a year later, there was only one campaign left in that building, maybe 1 to 2 years. It was the roadside assistance campaign. And eventually, that dissipated. So at that point, when the last murder happened, the call center was already crumbling in on itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, were the clients just pulling out, or was it?
Yes. Yeah. And I don't think it directly had anything to do with a murder per se.
Mm-hmm.
It was just they had enough of a lot of stuff. I mean, with the attrition, the performance.
Yeah.
I believe, from what I understand, our campaign, we cut the cord on that. We decided to sever the relationship with the client because it just wasn't profitable. Month after month, how they had built the KPI model, we were paying in fines.
Mm-hmm.
So the call center pulled the plug on that.
Yeah.
But because it was 2 parts, one of them actually was profitable. They lost both of them because they pulled the other one. So that happens. And then eventually they sent a lot of the financial campaigns overseas, and then just things over to different contact centers.
Right. No, definitely.
They still exist in different parts of the world, like this particular business, but it's under a different name now.
Yeah, all overseas, and
probably
run the same way, if not worse. So because they can get away with it over there. The stuff.
Oh, I know it's definitely worse. We had our campaign had a site down in Juarez, Mexico, and our SBU manager, he was brutal. He would make people go in. One guy was attacked with a machete, and he's like, "Why are you not at work?" So, and what was really interesting is when we finally put those episodes out, we got so many comments on YouTube from people all over the country that had worked for that particular contact center.
Mm-hmm.
And what I didn't know is down in North or South Carolina, we had a site and someone was shot on the floor.
Holy shit.
Someone had piggybacked in and shot somebody.
Huh. Was it someone that just piggybacked in from the street, or was it a former employee? Do you know? Or
that part they didn't get into, but they're somebody came in behind somebody and shot someone.
So no security there either then.
No.
So yeah, because that's one of the big things that they hammered down on was piggybacking back when, well, there was never real big security there anyway.
No, no one ever paid attention if you piggybacked.
No, even if, especially at the mill where there was one security guard, and then they'd either be over by one of the doors to get into one of the rooms, or they'd be outside or down in the little stairwell where if you left at night, you went the entirely different way. So
yeah, that old security guy, he's still there.
Oh, wow.
He's still there. He still is just hanging outside smoking all the time.
God bless him.
Yeah.
God bless him. So now that everybody's worked from home and everything, hopefully we'll see the fact that maybe there won't be centers like this anymore. Right. So, and I've worked in a couple like that. One in Brunswick, Maine, one, the Lewiston one, and then in Utah, with the gray drab walls and just cubicle farms, right? Where you were managed and you had to manage by spreadsheet, right? Right now, there are some contact centers where they're work from home, where keyloggers and stuff like that, which is ridiculous. Not my cup of tea, but each their own. So now,
so sorry, the pug's going crazy.
That's what pugs do. Yes. And there's no getting around that. So I'm surprised it took this long.
Mhm.
So, now, do you have any words of advice or encouragement to any other supervisors or leads on a floor where something like this, God forbid, might happen?
Like honestly, just like know what your worth is and try to like get yourself out of that position if something like that happens, because it's not going to get better. If a murder happens on your floor, clearly upper management is the bottom line and distancing themselves for it. Like if something happens like that, like you're not in a good place, a safe place, and you're probably not going to go far.
No,
Don't waste your time or life there.
no. With upper management's response to that, it was a joke. Like, you can't, like, they should have been on the floor, like, constantly during that leading. That's what their job is. It's to
Right.
lead the center. It's not to just, hey, don't talk about it.
Right.
Just, I'm going to fire you if you mention it. So no, that's the opposite of what they should have done. So, and then I don't know. It's such a huge, huge thing when it happens, and it made national news because it's Maine. You know, like, murders just don't happen there.
No, it really doesn't. I mean, definitely in Maine, when like a murder happens, it's going to be strange.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and especially when in Lewiston, where it was the main employer, like it was
Right.
everyone worked there at one point or another. Mostly because nothing else was hiring. But
nothing was hiring, and very early on, like, you know, you made your $9 an hour, and then, you know, in the late 90s, early 2000s, no one was paying that.
Nope.
So
It was actually real good pay. I mean, the other options were like McDonald's and Burger King. So, wow. So, all right. So where can we find you online?
yeah, so you can find me online at any podcast platforms if that is your preference. We're also on YouTube. It's just youtube.com/The Misery Machine. We post at least once a week. It's usually a Sunday night or Monday morning release. Sometimes we do more releases than that, and that's where we are.
All right, cool. Are you on LinkedIn or anything else?
No, I'm not on LinkedIn personally. The podcast isn't yet, but we're on basically all the other social media platforms.
All right, cool.
And we're on Discord as well. We have a pretty active group there.
Nice. I use Discord for my contact center.
Yeah.
It's amazing. So much better than Slack.
Yeah, we do Teams at work, and I hate it.
Oh, Teams is awful.
Yeah.
So Bill Gates will probably sue me, but whatever. So, all right, Jess Yergin, as I always called you.
Yes.
You got mad that one time, and then
and then it just became my name.
Yeah. It's like there were so many Jessicas. So, unless you were the one, you were the Yergin. So, and it's fine. So, thank you for coming on Caffeinated CX. This has been awesome.
No, thank you for having me. It was pretty awesome. It was great to catch up.
Definitely. It's been too long, so let's not let that happen.
Absolutely not.
So let's I might come back to Maine for a couple weeks, probably once COVID dies down.
Yeah.
Just I haven't been back since. So
Yep, you guys definitely should. It's fun here. You can come see Misery House.
that's what I like. So
yes.
all right. Thank you, Jess, very much.
Thank you.
All right.